What's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be focusing on this RX-7 3-rotor that's behind me. We're going to be getting you guys caught up on everything we've been doing with the build, and then kind of show you guys some of the plans for the future with it, and then focusing mostly on building the headers for this car, which is what we've been doing lately. Let's dive right into it. So a few months back, a guy named Mike reached out through a friend of ours named Aaron Parker, and had been told that through Martin's experience with rotaries that he would be kind of the guy to go to build this FD RX-7 with a 20B3 rotor. Mike had had the car for nearly 10 years and had put it on the back burner for wife and kids, and had finally wanted to get back to it and build this car. Initially, he had wanted to build a time attack 3-rotor RX-7, and now he really just kind of wants to drive it on the street. So with that in mind, Martin had to kind of make a plan for getting this car working. When Mike dropped it off, he had dropped off, a huge collection of parts that he had bought for this car with the intention of building it. And, Martin had to find a way to take all of these parts and find a way to merge them together to build a cohesive car that worked well. So kind of the first part that Martin had to do was find a way to make the engine and transmission work well together, and then to find a way to make the whole driveline system in this car work. That's kind of the most important part of a car is getting that set up, because everything else is based around that, So that was what Martin had to do first. So I'll walk you guys over and show you the engine for this car. So this is the engine. It is a 20B 3-rotor out of a Cosmo from Japan. You can see it's got some Chip Motorsports parts on it, as well as a factory Mazda dry sump race car front. So there was clearly a lot of thought put into this car and a lot of research done to find good quality parts and try and build a really nice car. So underneath the car, you guys can see here that this is a 370Z transmission. He's using a Collins adapter plate. However, when the car was dropped off, there was actually a bit of confusion about which bell housing he was supposed to be using. So when the car came to us, there was actually about 2 inches in between the splines where they were supposed to be and the clutch. They weren't even touching. So we knew that we had to get a smaller bell housing. So we talked to Collins, and Collins and us realized that he had bought the incorrect bell housing for the clutch setup that he was using. So we went ahead and got this. This is a 13B REW automatic transmission bell housing. It worked great. We actually had to make a couple of modifications to the throwout bearing and how that mounted to make sure that that worked properly. But we got everything situated. So once we got that problem figured out, Martin went ahead and modified the engine mounts and got the engine, and then went ahead and modified and made transmission mount as well, and got the transmission and engine both situated where they're going to be. So once Martin got the engine and transmission mounted, it was time to make sure that the diff was mounted correctly. It's really important, some of you guys might know, to make sure that your diff and your engine are on the same plane and are at the same angle. Having your drive shaft at a different angle than your engine is going to lead to a lot of vibration problems. I have known firsthand driving the Starlet that there can be vibration, though that happens for a different reason. Vibration from the drive shaft while you're driving, is a really, really annoying problem. So it was really imperative for Martin to get the diff located on the same plane and at the same angle as the engine and transmission, so that the drive shaft didn't have any problems and would spin without having any shake to it. Also, as you guys can see, Mike bought this really nice titanium welded exhaust and muffler from Japan. And this is a really nice piece that he was really keen on running. So Martin had to find a way to get the diff mounted without causing any problems here for the exhaust to be able to go through, and eventually, we'll line that up. Once Martin had the diff and then the engine and transmission mounted correctly and lined up so there was no shake, it was time to go ahead and move on to the front of the car. So one of the things I almost forgot to discuss with this car was actually that before we could mount the engine and transmission, we realized that the frame itself was pretty bent. You never know really what the past of a car is, but it was pretty clear that this car had been in a front-end accident and had the frame, tweaked and bent. So we took it to a frame shop, and Martin spent a day, there helping them get it all lined up properly. And so we got all of that lined up. It's really important, we could see pretty clear off the bat, that with the suspension totally adjusted the same, you know, one side had no camber and the other side had 5 degrees of camber. And we knew that this wasn't going to be, you know, good. So we went ahead and fixed this problem and got the engine and transmission mounted together. And after we were done with that, it was time to build the tubular front end for this car. So for any of the front end that we wanted to have this car welded together here, you can see we went ahead and used mild steel. It's the same as the chassis of the car. It allows it to flex and, you know, take fatigue in a front end accident the same way that the chassis would. We think that's the safest and best way through all of Martin's experience building. However, the customer does want a chromoly removable front bumper, so we're going to go ahead and make that next. First, you know, we wanted to get the body panels of the car, you know, the front fenders and the front bumper, and of course the headlights bolted together and mounted. You know, it's really important to get these things that have to be there, that can't be removed, you know, put on the car first. That way, you know, later you don't go, oh crap, where am I going to put the headlights? I didn't save myself enough room to make a mount for the headlight. So we went ahead and did that. We left this space open here for, you know, to be able to run the intercooler and be able to run some air intake. So that'll be kind of cool for the future. We do have this one headlight. Now that Martin is done with the front end for where he needs to get, it was time to start making the header and mounting the turbo for this car. I'll go ahead and let Martin talk about kind of his thought process moving through building a turbo header, and we'll go from there.
When you design a turbo manifold like this, there's a lot to consider. Obviously, placement of the turbo is, you know, number one thing. You know, you have so much room to work with in the engine bay. So as you can see over here, before I placed the turbo, I needed to kind of sort of have a rough plan of how I'm gonna place the radiator and the intercooler. Obviously, I'm trying to do a V mount, what they call a V format cooling system right here. So I basically needed to mount certain things before I can even think about placing the turbo. So that's kind of how my thought process went. All these things that I had to build, you know, especially like a headlight. You know, this customer wanted to drive this car on the street sometimes, and he really needed these headlights. So these are the kind of things that I can't really add later on. So obviously, placement of the engine is the most essential, you know, the first thing you do, you know. So we went ahead and did that, and then I kind of had to build this front frame kind of halfway done. It's not, you know, I still need to make a bumper support and a full bumper and all that, but I basically needed to build this much in order to place the turbo. After placing the turbo, it was very important for us to build something with the equal length runners in mind, because we want the sound, and obviously performance wise you want to make the runners equal length, so you know every rotor has a chance to have same amount of exhaust pressure going into the turbo. And from my experience too, kind of a long runner headers like that is good for rotary, so it'll have a little bit chance for the exhaust to cool down. Exhaust pressure gets so hot on the rotary, basically you're going to be just producing so much heat in the turbo manifold that, you know, having these kind of long runner type exhaust system, turbo manifold seem to work really good on the rotary. This is my way. It's a rough way to measure it, but it usually comes out pretty accurate enough. I typically, you know, first place in the turbo and then get one runner that's the furthest. I usually do that the shortest distance possible, because that kind of gives me the base, and then everything else. And you can see this one too, we call it the rogue tube, because it really has to snake around in order to meet this length requirement. And the third one is usually pretty easy, because you know, you have much more room, you know, than this front one. Front one had all kinds of issues, like, is it gonna get too close to the turbo drain? Is it too close to the rack? Is it too close to the frame, and that kind of thing. So, and then one last thing, you know, I'm gonna unbolt this and I'm gonna tack weld this last one, and I'm gonna make sure this manifold can go on and off without removing too much stuff in the engine bay. To me, that's really important too, because you know, when you work on your car at the track or at home or whatever, you want to be able to do, you want to be able to make something that's also easy to work on, you know, not just purely designed around performance. So as you can see, this is the last runner piece that I just tack welded, and I'm going to make sure it can go on and off the car. Last thing that I want to say about turbo manifolds. Every customer has different budget and, you know, different materials they want to work with. This customer provided me with a beautiful Cnc Machine Flange like this. It's very well designed. Has a little ring right here so that when you crush the OEM exhaust gasket, it's designed to have a really nice seal right here. I love working with stuff like this, and usually things tend to come out a lot nicer. It's made out of 321 stainless steel, so it's much stronger than 304 for heat cycling and all that. And so as these elbows and this piece right here. It's a CNC machined collector, turbo collector. Makes it so much easier for a fabricator to build something like this when you have nice materials to work with. Okay, so the last runner is all done and welded up, and I'm going to cool it down naturally on this chill plate that I made, so that'll ensure the main flange not to be warped when everything cools down from welding. And after that, we're gonna take it off, test it back on the car with the turbo, and we're gonna move on.
So while Martin waits for the header to cool properly, he is test fitting the alternator for the first time and trying to figure out how and where he wants to mount that properly.
Close enough to here by making a new back piece over here. Space this out more. Make a new one of these.
Yeah, but it's way too close to that oil.
Well, oil is going to go down 45 degrees. This is, I notched this. And we can technically, I think, we can make it work where it lines up. And then we can make a little bracket. All right.
So this is a basic rough idea of where, you know, the turbo and the main section of the headers is going to be. Seems to fit pretty good. As we said, you know, you can see that it's kind of close to the steering rack up in there. You know, so these are things that you kind of have to plan for and give yourself space for the future. So now that we've got that mounted, we're waiting for wastegates. Once the wastegates get here, we'll be making, the spots for those. And while we were waiting for that to cool, you guys saw we were trying to kind of place the alternator. Martin's using some washers up in there to kind of hold the...
But it's not gonna work because of the dry sump fittings, so we're gonna have to raise this up a little bit.
So that kind of stuff is something you have to kind of plan for. You see that the dry sump has its oil fittings right here. We're going to use 45s to try and get those down as quickly as possible, but even still, we'll have to move it up so that the belt goes up a little bit sooner and does not run into the oil fittings. So we've got the hood closed. So of course, one thing that you want to, plan for when you mount the hood and when you mount the turbo is to make sure that these kinds of things don't hit and can still, latch properly and not contact, so you don't have to cut your hood up and that your hood works just fine. So that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully in the next video for this car we get the wastegates and we can finish up the header system and start to get to work on the rest of the exhaust and the rest of the car as a whole. We'll see you guys then.